tonight. I pray for the police's safety. I pray for everyone's safety. But in a week or so, these riots may have gone away again. The rain may have fallen, the temperature may have fallen, and it may be under control again. Will we actually still be thinking about this in a week? Will we still be thinking about it in a month? Will we still be thinking about it in 6 months? Or that we have these people in Britain who have no real prospect of ever being integrated part of our country?
The latest on the riots. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is holding an emergency Cobra meeting this evening as police forces brace themselves for more trouble on the streets of towns and cities, primarily in England is where we've seen it all so far, other than Belfast, of course. There's lots to consider in this. Tim, I think, first of all, I do want to start with the kind of political response so far. Has it been what it needs to be?
No.
Okay.
Look, this situation is moving incredibly fast, and a new government did not expect to have to deal with this. This is not Labour's fault. This is reflecting really entrenched problems that have existed in this country for a long time. First thing that we all need to say, of course, we all must always say, anyone who's a respectable person in public life, this is jobbery, it's thuggery, it's alcohol-fuelled, it's drug-fuelled, it's unacceptable. And first of all, we must always have a law and order response. But, and I say that but carefully, but there are underlying reasons why this has happened. And I think there's been an enormous focus so far on the scale of immigration that we've had into Britain without consent and the failure to integrate. But one of the under-discussed dimensions is when we had the 2011 riots in the United Kingdom, people very much looked at the sort of the social alienation of some of the rioters. And I think that's been an under-discussed part of this, actually. A few floors up earlier on in the day when I was on Talk TV, I talked about this. But there is 10 to 15% of the UK population, an impoverished working class who feel and are almost completely detached from the rest of Britain. They are serially dependent on welfare. Their family structure has collapsed. They have no hope of really being part of British society. A large proportion of them are white working class. A large proportion of them are from Islamic traditions. And we are a rich enough society to park these people on the edge of society. We can pay their welfare bills. We can police them. We can keep them at bay. But that's not compassion. That's not what we should be. We can afford to leave them on the margins, and occasionally they will erupt. And in a week or so, who knows what's going to happen tonight? I pray for the police's safety. I pray for everyone's safety. But in a week or so, these riots may have gone away again. The rain may have fallen, the temperature may have fallen, and it may be under control again. Will we actually still be thinking about this in a week? Will we still be thinking about it in a month? Will we still be thinking about it in 6 months? Or that we have these people in Britain who have no real prospect of ever being integrated part of our country. We said after the 2011 riots we would deal with this, that we would face up to it, and we didn't. My concern is we will move on, as we always do, and the next eruption that we see will be bigger. It'll be more violent. It'll be more horrible. That's my worry about this situation.
I mean, there's a lot there to be really anxious about, but the starting point was, has the political reaction in the immediate term been sufficient? And I think you've got to do both. You've got to take an immediate term view and a longer term view. And the longer term view looks at really difficult issues like education, like geographic inequality, which is something that governments for decades have said that they'll look into, look at skills training, look at social cohesion, social mobility, and the fact that Labour haven't come straight out and said, here's our plan for how to deal with the 10-15% of people who feel utterly disenfranchised and disassociated from British society in their first month. I think give them some time to figure out what their plan is on that. But in the immediate term, it's about safety and it's about public order, and it's about giving full backing to the police and the emergency services who are trying to get control of the situation. And that is much easier to do if there is a united sentiment in the country from all political parties that whatever the underlying causes of this unrest, the violence that we have seen is flat out unacceptable. It's not about the murder of 3 little girls. It's not about a sense of people not feeling listened to. It's about violence, and it's the same kind of violence that in the 80s you might have seen erupting at a football match, and now it erupts with a very, very, very tangential link to a horrific event that the vast majority of the public, according to a YouGov poll that was out today, don't buy at all, and rightly so. And those are different things, and I would like to see actually the Conservative Party, under whose watch a lot of these problems were allowed to worsen, even if we don't say exactly when they started. I would like to see them uniting with the Labour government and saying we can all say this is acceptable, this is not about legitimate concerns, this is about violence. And I haven't seen that so far.
Oh, you have. I think that's unfair, Rachel. I think
There's one tweet from Rishi Sunak.
Surely
I agree with you on Rishi Sunak. He's been absent. But
I mean, he is the leader of the opposition.
You look at what Priti Patel has said. You look at what Robert Jenrick has said. You look at what James Cleverly has said. There's been
James Cleverly has said that Labour haven't that it's time for actions and not words, and he sort of picked apart some of Keir Starmer's.
But he's absolutely condemned the violence, and he's condemned the thuggery, and he's called for the full force of law to be brought against these people.
With this in mind, is it not fair to point out that the last riots that we compare to were in 2011, when the Conservatives were in power, in coalition, and these riots have broken out 4 weeks into a Labour government? The Conservatives have basically been in charge for the entirety of that time. So the problem flared up, the problem hasn't been solved, and the problem's flared up again.
I'm not making. I don't
Sure,
think. I don't think I've.
just to build on.
I don't think I've made any party political point.
Sure.
So far, I've defended what Conservatives' reaction, but I'm not blaming Labour. Of course, it'd be ridiculous to blame Labour for what's happening at the moment. What I've tried to say is that these are deep-seated, chronic problems in the UK. I think there's been a. Look, the problem is, I did Newsnight, BBC Two's Newsnight on Friday night, and before I went on that programme, I don't normally feel nervous before I go onto a programme, but I felt nervous because what I do know is if you make you use an ill-chosen phrase or something in the debate like this, you get crucified, as racist or incendiary or whatever. It's obviously wrong. It feels instinctively wrong that at a time when there's riots taking in Britain's streets that we're talking at all about the root causes, because the juxtaposition is what the rioters basically want. They want somehow to be talking about their grievances. The absolute first response must be to condemn the violence and to jail, have the policies in place to jail these people. My concern is, though, that in 3 weeks' time, when these events, and someone like me or some other person brings up these concerns, you'll be shouted down as, well, you're just like those rioters, 3 weeks ago or so. What is difficult in our society at the moment is to think about the context of why these riots are happening and not be accused of justifying those riots. And I think there has been a legitimate focus on the root causes in terms of immigration and lack of integration. What I do think has been missing, and maybe I even sound like a lefty, Callum, in this, is that actually there is poverty. Yeah. There's a demoralisation of the working class. There's a de-skilling of the working class. There's actually some pretty significant economic explanations for why these disturbances are taking place. And actually, I'm surprised in a way that hasn't been a bigger part. You hear a lot of people on the left and in the Labour Party saying, there is no justification at all for this because they're worried that therefore they're giving succour to the views of people who are anti-immigration. Actually, there are some fundamental root causes of why we're seeing this. And at some appropriate point, perhaps not now, I get that, but at some appropriate point, we do need to really seriously consider why that's happening.
I will agree with Tim there and also point out that Tim has been criticised by people on the right for being so forthright in your condemnation of the rioters. But I think a lot of the problems from 2011 never got addressed, never got solved, and that there has been a sense, particularly from the Conservative government since then, that if you can improve the economic outlook of the country as a whole, overall, then pockets of deprivation and regional inequality don't matter because on paper it looks like everything's fine. And it's very clear that the people who are taking to the streets and behaving in the most despicable, violent ways do not feel that they have a stake in society. and a future. And I don't think that in any way should affect how they are judged by the law. But clearly, people who do feel like they have a stake in society don't riot.
Yeah. Yeah. Helen says, do your guests think Yvette Cooper should meet with leaders of the riots? It sounds like they feel unheard, but I suppose my immediate take on that is I'm not convinced there are particularly leaders. I'm not sure who those people would be.
There isn't. One of the challenges with this, and we talk about the EDL being prescribed, is that it's a group that doesn't really exist. I mean, that stuff
kind of fragmented.
It is being organised online in groups on channels like Telegram and Signal, but there aren't sort of clear leaders. I do think some, and I won't name them on this programme, but there are some high-profile individuals with very large followings on social media who are making very incendiary statements under the free speech, it's just an opinion defence, and I'd be interested to see how the law tackles them.
We had a week ago when we were with John, Rachel, we talked about the irresponsibility of lots of people on social media. Can I just say about the irresponsibility of mainstream media, though, as well? Earlier on today, there was a press conference where the some of the individuals involved in the attacks at Manchester Airport that we all can remember.
Oh, yes.
Took part in. I don't know whether either of you saw it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was absolutely extraordinary that the BBC and the Sky News covered those press conferences live. These people, for some reason, haven't been charged yet, even though we saw the violence that they perpetrated against the police. Imagine if the BBC and Sky had done a press conference with a solicitor talking with two people on either side of him who had been rioting in Southport or Newcastle, or who'd been involved in that extraordinary evil attack on the Holiday Inn in Rotherham. I do sometimes wonder whether, at a time when people think there is a two-tier system operating in this country of policing and of coverage, what on earth the BBC and Sky thought they were doing at giving prime-time coverage to the solicitor for those people involved in that Manchester Airport attack. And this is part of what's fueling the problem, is that there are people out there who think that if you are a minority and you commit a violence or an offence against the British state or British community, you're treated differently than if you're,
Priti Patel came out very strongly against that, and this is Priti Patel, the really quite draconian Home Secretary when she was, and she was very clear about the distinction between peaceful protest, however much disruption it may cause, and we've seen protests cause tremendous levels of disruption, and violent protest, which is different and is being treated differently.
But the Manchester attackers, there was nothing peaceful protest about them.
Yeah.